we're going to be presenting an introduction to VMware Validated Designs. First off, just an introduction to myself. My name is Forbes Guthrie. I'm a product manager. I work within what we call Integrated Systems Business Unit, which is one of the R&D business units within VMware, focused on two products, VMware Validated Designs and also Cloud Foundation. I'm going to be speaking today with my colleague Nick.
Hey everyone, I'm Nick Marshall, Senior Solutions Architect with the VVD team and also looking after Cloud Foundation as well.
Yeah. Thanks, Nick.
Thanks, Forbes.
So Nick and I are going to jump about. Basically, there's sort of two parts to this session, really. First off, the first half is really going to be talking through what is the VVD. It's just to give an overview, an understanding of what it is and why we do it. And then secondly, we're going to really focus on some of the new stuff that's coming through. The last release that we had in 4.3, some of the announcements that we had going into VMworld US, and then some things that have just recently happened in the last few days for Barcelona here. Can I get a show of hands? Who's actually gone and downloaded or looked on the docs.vmware.com at VVDs themselves? Okay, so some of you are fairly familiar. Anyone actually deployed a VVD? Okay, so we've got a couple here. Yeah, okay, great stuff. I'm happy to take questions at any time during the session. Just feel free. There isn't a central mic, so if you stick your hand up, I'll try and repeat it just for the audio, because the audio is being recorded. But also, Nick and I will try and make sure there's plenty of time at the end as well to answer questions. And even if we run low, we'll hang around afterwards, so feel free. Okay, usual disclaimer. I actually want to point out a couple of things about the disclaimer. I know people tend to rush through it. First off, we're not focused on new kind of roadmap items, but Nick and I may let some things slip during the session. If we do, there's no commitment that those things will necessarily happen. Secondly, I like to call out the second last sentence there. Technical feasibility and market demand will affect final delivery. Market demand. So what I'm trying to put across there is I'm a product manager. I'm always interested in feedback. So if you've got suggestions, ideas, comments, just general feedback for the team, let us know, because that is the best way of actually improving the products that we have at VMware. So genuinely, if you want to come and talk to us about it, please do. Try and keep the marketing slides to an absolute minimum. So really, you just got one here. I'm going to quickly kind of go through it. But it is useful because we were trying to describe the VVD. I mean, just there in the subtitle, prescriptive blueprints. So first off, it is a set of blueprints. It is primarily a documentation product. Right? It explains the deployment, comprehensive deployment, and also operational practices. So design, deployment, and operations. Four kind of key areas. One is a complete data center level design. So it takes a very holistic view of the data center. All the components that VMware consider within their software defined data center, we incorporate them. We work out the best way of actually deploying and operationalizing them. Standard and consistent. We take a very opinionated view in the design and we follow that all the way through. Proven and robust, so we have experts that have come from our professional services, that have come, being customers, being internal to VMware, and we test the living daylights out of this thing. And applicable to a broad set of use cases. So it is very opinionated. We have a standardized design, but we try and make the design objectives of that design fit a very broad set of use cases. It means it's likely going to fit what you're doing in your data center. And it can also be used for a number of different things. You're not just going to use it for one application. You're going to use it for most of your use cases. So here's a kind of strange diagram to put up at the start. And the reason I do that, this is actually the first diagram within the VVD documents themselves. It's actually basically on the front page. And all it does is it lays out all the different components that we deploy in a standard SDDC VVD and shows some of the relationships between them. What I'm actually trying to show there is it's actually really complicated. There's a lot of things that we deploy within the SDDC, and this is one of the reasons that we actually have the VVD, because when you start adding two products to a mix, then you've got to figure out the interoperability between them, the right versions, and which of those two products you need to upgrade in what order. When you start adding more and more and more products, that becomes an exponential problem. And that's really why you need that kind of engineered solution. When you've got a complex data center, it's not just as straightforward as picking up one product guide and following it. You've really got to deal with all of that. All of the docs can be found at that URL. Go there, and they're available for free if it's not immediately obvious. Also, this actually came out just the week of VMworld US, actually. First time we'd done it before. We published all of the diagrams as Visio diagrams, so you can actually download them, take them and change them for your environment. So, put in your own host names, your own IP addresses, etc., customize it for your environment. And we also put the stencils in there, so you can even take them and change them as you alter the design for your environment. So, you think, well, why do I need a VVD? Like, they're not actually, it's just documentation. It's just telling me what I already know, perhaps. Well, yes and no. Yes, can you achieve some of these things yourself? Potentially, yes. But it's actually extremely complicated to do it. So if you do it yourself, you need to test it and validate it, right? That's actually a fairly onerous task. You need to figure out the upgrade path. So every time you want to upgrade just one component, you need to test that and figure out the process on a very frequent basis. And when you have a dozen different components in there, figuring out the life cycle of each of them, if they're being released, maybe each one is being released every quarter, that's a lot of work just to keep the thing updated. And you need to keep you and your team updated with skills just to be able to manage that. Whereas with a VVD, you have a number of different options. You can take the guides yourself and go through the deployment. You can go to our professional services, or you can go through our CPA partners for deployment. It has the flexibility. You can use vSAN or you can use external storage. I mean, we actually talk about the VVD in terms of vSAN because it's the storage that we have available to us within our data centers. But you can actually use, I want to make it clear, you can use external storage as long as it meets the performance and the capacity requirements that we describe with vSAN. It doesn't have to be a new deployment either. You can actually use existing hardware that you've already got. As long as it's on VMware HCL, you can use it for a VVD. And as I said, the design is flexible enough that you can use it for quite a broad set of use cases. So what do you actually get? Well, first off, what we call day zero, day one. So a full set of documents which cover basically the design and the deployment. So things like the architecture, detailed design, planning and prep, getting yourself ready for the deployment, full set of deployment docs for different scenarios, and then operational verification to make sure it's actually been deployed properly and is up and running. So one of the most valuable things within the VVD is the architecture and detailed design documents that we have. We go through that and we create basically design objectives. At the start of that document, there's a design objective. It's a couple of pages laying out what we're hoping to achieve. We break that down with a number of design decisions. So each one, at the moment I've got there 350 plus, I think it's about 380 design decisions exist. So each one we go through in great detail, explaining what choice has to be made, what choice we make, why we're making it, and then the impact on the rest of the design. So any of you that are familiar with the VCDX style approach to look at your design will kind of understand what's required there, the number of decisions that we have. So it's very extensively thought through. And then after the day zero, day one type guidance, we also have day two. So up here, for example, is some of the operational guidance that we have. How do you actually then maintain that environment? Talking about things like monitoring and alerting, backup and restore, site recovery, like DR. But in addition to this sort of list, we're also looking at other areas. For example, compliance guidance. How do you deal with, this is a new area for us, how do we potentially deal with things like PCI and HIPAA, etc. We're looking at what we're calling workload domain guidance, and I'll talk about a couple of them we've just been published recently. Areas like tech notes. What we consider tech notes are things that extend the VVD, so not actually part of the VVD, but just additional options to give additional flavor and give you different ways of using the VVD. We also actually provide some some small software tools as well. We are primarily a documentation project, but there is certain software tools that we complement it with. For example, there is a SDDC certificate fling. We've learned that actually changing the certificates of all the components within the SDDC for our VVD customer is extremely complicated. So we built up a number of small software tools to automate that process, for example. Okay, so we talk about the VMware Validated Designs. What does that really mean to say that it's validated? These are some of the sort of things that we do internally that really add value and that perhaps I like to talk about them because it's not always that obvious when you look at the VVDs that some of these things have actually happened. But in all of the releases that we do, every time we come out with a new version of it, first off, we're looking at the interoperability. So every release we do, we have what's known as a bill of materials, a BOM. It's basically listing out all the different software products that we have and the specific versions for each one. We test all of those products work well together. So each VMware product group, when they release their software, they obviously test it very thoroughly, make sure it works well. But they obviously make changes. Every time they come out with a new version, they make small changes. They change the UI, they change the APIs, they make improvements, they add things, they take things away. It's not until you actually test those things in combination together that we start to find areas that maybe don't work so well together, that we haven't actually thought all the way through. So rather than that being something that you guys suddenly discover, we're actually doing that internally well before it gets out to you. So we're figuring out which list of software and versions work best together. And that's done through that kind of interoperability process. Time to value. So we have something, we call it internally measurement and optimization. We actually sit someone down and we build a whole SDDC manually. We record the whole thing and we figure out how long it takes to do each step. Whether or not they have to, we record whether or not they have to enter any data, if there is a default that they can select when they enter that data. Anytime they have to context switch, i.e. they're moving between consoles or jumping from the command line to a UI, we lay all that stuff out and then generate data out of that to figure out which bits are easy and which bits are basically hard. And we can provide real direct feedback to the product groups, and it lets them improve their products. And then it also lets us figure out where we can make improvements to the documentation and potentially provide tooling as well. So it's a very useful thing. Scale and functional testing. So we basically set up a test lab and we beat up an SDDC very, very thoroughly before we release any new versions. What we're actually doing there is taking what we think a customer would perhaps go through over about an 18-month period, and we stress a test bed over a week to kind of simulate that. So we're basically we're pushing up to 10,000 VMs, but not just like running 10,000 VMs on a test bed for a week. What we're actually doing is taking it from 0, getting it to 10,000, but while we're getting it to 10,000, while we're actually deploying all those VMs, we're also concurrently deleting 150 per hour and then adding them as well to the mix. So we're doing a number of different things to really stress every part of the system, using VRA to make those deployments. And we do a bunch of functional tests as well to make sure that when you do certain things that you would do in your environment, that we actually test what the reaction is within SDC. And then security and compliance, we are spending much more time now figuring out the best way to basically create a secure SDDC environment for you and incorporating that within the documentation that we provide. Okay, I think that's you now.
The VVD contains, thank you. What we haven't done is really dived into what do you actually get from a infrastructure perspective. So I want to just run you through what you actually get as a result of standing up a VVD. So we specifically call this one out as this is the VVD for SDDC. It's not a VVD for VDI, it's not a VVD for some other solution. This is specific for the software-defined data center, and I'm sure you've all seen the messaging and starting to understand what a software-defined data center is, so I'll cover this off quickly. We now virtualize compute, storage, and networking, and they are the three core components of an infrastructure and a data center. We layer on top of that some kind of CMP, the cloud management platform. In our case, we use VRealize Suite and VRA for that, but there's obviously other CMPs that you can add. And then on top of that, you run your workloads, your VMs, your containers, whatever it is that your customers or your tenants, your business needs to run, right? That's a very high-level SDDC. I hope that everybody kind of gets that. That's something that we've been messaging fairly strongly for a while now. So that's the kind of the marketing slide of what an SDDC is, but there's obviously, we peel that back and there's a lot more detail to it. And that's why we need this solution documentation to get there. So I'm going to dive a little bit deep. If you do have questions, please stop and ask and we can run through it. So you can see here we call this the standard design. We have other designs in there. But we start out with what we call a two-pod or two workload domain design. As you can see over here on the left, we have the blue management pod. And inside the management workload domain or pod, we have all of our components. So if you think of vCenter, Platform Services Controller, the NSX Manager, VROps, VRA, all of those VMs that VMware themselves kind of need laying down to run the stack of software lives in here. Some of you may have looked at reference architectures in the past and they have, oh yeah, we have a management cluster and a compute cluster. It's very similar in that regard. And then on the right-hand side, you can see the green where we have a shared edge and compute pod. Now the reason that we call it shared edge and compute is the way that we do our networking is that we have edge services provisioned for north-south traffic for the whole of the software-defined data center. Now I'm getting a little bit technical here, so please ask questions if you need to. So what we do is we have those NSX edge devices for the whole of the software-defined data center, but we don't want to share those in the management section, okay? We don't want all of our traffic going through that. So we share it with compute, okay? So we've got some extra NSX components in compute. And then we just have a fairly generic cluster over there that you can then run your workloads on. The reason that we separate those out is that you can delineate between your management components. If you need to patch or maintain some of the management components, it's not affecting your customer workloads, okay? Or if you have, let's say, a vCenter goes down for your compute workload, where you can still manage that through the management interface for the management pod. So there's certainly benefits there. And as you go through, as Forbes was mentioning, we have all of these decisions of why we've done this detailed throughout the design decisions, and all of the implications are there as well. So you can actually dive really deep and get our thought process as me and some of the other architects have gone through and worked out why we do things the way we do. And then if we want to be able to scale this environment out, you can see additionally on the end there, we have additional compute pods. So you can just stamp out additional compute pods. We don't need to change management necessarily because the management components don't really change. We just need additional compute environments to be able to stand up more VMs, more workloads for your tenants. So that's a repeatable model, and we don't necessarily need an additional edge services for those pods either. So when we're standing this up, we want to be able to enable you to be able to have certain functionality, certain use cases need to be met. One of them is disaster recovery. So within the VVD, we have this concept of regions, and this standard design is a dual region design. You'll probably understand if you know anything about the nomenclature from Amazon AWS, they have regions. We have a very similar thing here. And a region is a geographically dispersed location, somewhere in the realm of sub 150, 100 milliseconds of latency between those two sites. And that's to avoid huge disasters, right? So when we stand up, if I just go back, we have an instance of this environment in the first region, which in this case might be San Francisco, and then a secondary copy of this infrastructure set up in Los Angeles. And then we tell you how to configure the replication using SRM and vSphere replication to ensure that you can do failover and fail back between those environments. And then if you want even more redundancy on top of that, we also have the concept of availability zones, which is like having 2 data halls within the same data center that are physically separate, or maybe 2 sites within a campus or something like that, where you've got much lower latency, so sub 10 milliseconds of latency and 10 gig of bandwidth to be able to do synchronous replication. And within our solution here, we enable stretch clustering, stretch vSAN storage clusters between the 2 AZs to be able to facilitate even more availability there. So I talked a little bit about kind of this really big dual region, multiple availability zones design. And that's a high bar for some customers to be able to get into first up. And we recognize that there are smaller customers that don't need all of that capacity, at least initially. So we came up with, we listened to our customers and we came up with this smaller consolidated design. And the thing that's interesting about this is actually the last bullet point there, which is easily transitions to the standard 2-pod design. So one of our core principles when we started the VMware Validated Design program is we never, ever, ever want to design a customer into a corner. We've seen too many reference architectures where they say, this is the best way to deploy it, and then they turn away and they'll run away and they'll dream up some new architecture for the new version of the product. That's not how we work. Okay, so if you are only wanting a small infrastructure at the beginning, we'll show you how to transition through to the next one. And I'll talk about upgrade in the future as well. So once you're on that VVD train, we bring you along for the ride. We never want to leave any customer stranded in a previous state where they can't get out of. And that helps inform some of the decisions we make about how the architecture is actually laid down. So additionally, we've got some documentation around remote office and branch office locations. Now, we've got 2 different kind of models here, the centralized and the decentralized model. There's kind of pros and cons of each. We've documented more detailed around the decentralized model, which helps because if you've got a remote office, in the decentralized model, you've got a standalone vCenter and NSX in that site. So if the WAN connection is severed, you can still manage that site individually. But again, this is one of those components that adds on to the value of that core VVD. All right, so let's talk a little bit about VVD 4.3. Now we've covered the general overview. If you want more detailed, really in-depth detail about multiple availability zones and how all that works, I've got another session on Thursday that goes really deep into how the networking and the stretch clustering works within the VVD. So you can come and check that one out. All right, so we talked about what was in a VVD, and Forbes mentioned about the interoperability between the different products, right? And you'll notice up here that we've got our latest VVD only has vSphere 6.5U2. People look at us and go, well, hang on a second, vSphere 6.7's been out for a while now. Why is that? There's a couple of reasons. So if you notice, 6.5U2 was actually released around the same time as 6.7 GA, but there was no upgrade path. And if you remember, I said, we never leave you in a place where you can't upgrade. So we wanted to make sure that when we released the next version of the VVD, there was an upgrade path for our customers for every single one of these products, okay? So when we release the new version, and Forbes can talk a little bit about maybe slip in some things about that next version, it will have vSphere 6.7 update 2 because there's an upgrade path there. But the bill of materials is really important because that's what we test, okay? You might not be on the absolute bleeding edge, but you at least have that assurity that you are running a robust, tested, interoperable system. We've been doing VVDs for 4 years. Keep me honest, Forbes, four or so years. And over time, we've added functionality. We've got feedback from you, our customers, and added additional things in. When we started out, we didn't release the first version publicly. It was just for some partners. But 2.0 was a single region design, right? And then for 3.0, we added a secondary region. Then we started adding, consolidated. We started adding robo, stretch clustering. We're iterating and adding features all of the time to this stuff. So if you've got use cases that don't quite fit or didn't quite fit before, the chances are that we're going to address those use cases in that market before. And so extra scenario guidance and stuff evolves along the way as well. And then we add additional products in as well. Like if you know of what VRealize Suite LCM is, it's an automation product that you can use to do lifecycle management of a certain component. So it's not just static in terms of the product set. So if a new product comes out that adds value to the stack, we might say, well, we want to add that new product in the next version. And that was the case for VRealize Suite LCM. And in VRSLCM, we use that tool to deploy our actual architecture. So we work internally with the product teams to make sure that when they're doing their testing and when they're starting to define some architectures that their automation tools lay down, they actually lay down our architecture. So one of the benefits that Forbes didn't mention is that internally, VMware is using the VVD design to do all of their testing, right? So you get the benefit if you deploy this architecture to know that our internal teams are using the very same architecture that you're using, which, I mean, it reciprocates those benefits there as well. All right, and as I said, we do not ever design you into a corner, and we never ever leave you without a path to upgrade. So we always give upgrade guidance, and this shows the difference in versions and where we've gone from 4.2 to 4.3. And I think one thing to point out, apart from the fact that we've gone from this version to that version, that's important, right? Because you need to stay up to date for security measures and features that you need to implement and that kind of thing. But the other thing that we do within our upgrade guidance is if we add a product or a feature or we change the architecture, within that step-by-step upgrade guidance, we also give you the architectural upgrade process as well. So I'll give you an example. Between 4.1 and 4.2 or 4.2 and 4.3, I can't remember which one it was, we needed to add an extra node to VRealize automation. Okay, well, what goes into that? Well, you have to sign some certificates and you have to add an IP address to the load balancer pool, and then you have to deploy the appliance, and then you have to bring it online. But that's something that you don't have to really think about trying to work out, because we give you the exact step-by-step on how to add that within our upgrade guidance. And we do it in a way that it tells you when to do it in that upgrade process rather than trying to figure it out on your own. So I'm going to hand it back to Forbes here, and I'm going to let you talk about this slide.
Oh, okay.
That was done.
Thanks, Nick. Okay, so we got plenty of time. I was trying to get through the first few slides at the start to make sure we had a bit more time for some of the interesting stuff. So one of the things that we've got here, we talk about, in fact, I think there's a transition. Several transitions. Okay. We have a tool. We've actually had a tool within the VVD for quite some time. We used to call it the Deployment Toolkit, the DTK. Recently, we've changed its name to be Cloud Builder. And this is a tool that ordinarily is provided through professional services or one of our partners. And it automates the deployment of the VVD. The alternative to this is we have multiple deployment guides, one for region A, but then a secondary one for region B if you're doing a dual region setup. We also have, in addition to that, another deployment guide for availability zones if you're going to do that. And some of the new workload domain guidance also had its own deployment guides. For example, the region A deployment guide is probably about 450 pages long at the moment. It's a lot of text to get through. So this tool automates that process. And it's something that we're really driving forward with. Now, I'll point out, it does not include LCM, that last bullet point there. It doesn't help you with upgrades. It just helps with the deployment. If you want upgrades, then you really want to start looking at Cloud Foundation as being the kind of next step from this. But one of the areas that we're evolving into, and we specifically don't have a slide about it because it is, and one of the reasons why it's taken a while for the next version to come through. We have 4.3, which came out in July, I think. The next version, which will, as Nick pointed out, will include vSphere 6.7 Update 1. So it'll be our first 6.7 based BOM. We're going to be starting to migrate some of the deployment guidance to using this tool and making it more widely available. So it's something that's actually coming through. That tool itself, it's basically an OVA. You fill out a very large, well, I say very large, a spreadsheet. We found the spreadsheet is actually the easiest way to gather all the inputs in one place. Rather than try and squeeze this into a wizard that would take a long period of time to get through, you can fill out a spreadsheet. It means you can do it beforehand. You can take it, go and talk to your networking team, get the details that you need for that, go and talk to this team and that team. And then you actually go through the actual tool itself, which brings up the environment, imports the details from that spreadsheet, and deploys all the different components. Okay, so now we're coming on to the announcements that were made after 4.3. Some of these were, as I said, actually announced at Vegas, and some of them have just come through in the last couple of days, so probably be new to all of us. First one there is our support of NSX-T. So everything that we've been talking about up till now has been based on NSX-V, the version of NSX that has been around for a while now. But what we wanted to do was add support for NSX-T. Many of you will have heard about NSX-T. It's really the kind of the follow-on product from that. You'll have heard from my colleagues from NSBU talking about how this is the future. Some of the new functionality that's coming through is being added to NSX-T. What we want to do is provide you choice. There is a difference between NSX-V and NSX-T, what it can do for you. We're not just replacing our use of NSX-V with T. What we're doing for the interim period is providing a choice where you can actually deploy an additional workload domain and use NSX-T in that environment if the workloads that you want to run are best suited to a T environment. Now, at the moment, this is based on NSX-T 2.2. We're looking at refreshing that very shortly for 2.3, which is the latest version that's just come out. It has gone through a number of iterations, and the design has changed slightly. We had an early access of this document that I think came out in May, which is based on 2.1. We had to do it across a 3-pod design, which is the older design of the VVD, because of certain limitations with NSX-T. With this version, we managed to collapse that down into a 2-pod design, and then the new refresh that will come out very shortly and based on 2.3 makes some changes again. It comes with an architecture and design and also a deployment guide. So it is a fully featured thing. But this is one of the sort of new style of documents that we're coming through with to provide an addition to your VVD as an optional thing. You don't have to do this, but if you want to run it NSX-T, then here's a really great way of doing it. Secondly, so this one's for PKS. Now you'll notice this, we've labeled this early access, and we will actually watermark it with early access. All the early access documents don't get published on docs.vmware.com, which is where we normally put our VVD stuff. We put this on the community site, which is like the sort of VMware forum, if you like. Partly to show that it's an unvalidated thing. Basically what we're doing under early access is giving you an early preview of what we plan to validate and publish as a proper VVD. But we don't wait until we've gone through all the internal testing, and we don't wait until we have the deployment steps there. We want to get the architecture out there to you, because we recognize that when you're looking at setting something up, you're going to look at the architecture, you're going to analyze it. It's going to take a period of time before you're actually ready to deploy it. So having this a little bit ahead of time, a month or two ahead of time, can actually be valuable to you. It also gives us a really good avenue for feedback. We put it there. Anyone that wants to can put comments against the document and say, hey, why is it set like this? I've read this, et cetera, come to us with different use cases. Now, the early access version of PKS that we have, it's just the architecture at the moment. It's based on VVD's approach towards PKS is to run it on NSX-T. It was actually based on the NSX-T design that we had around NSX-T 2.1. So we're now updating this, so it will be based on the latest version of our NSX-T guidance. Okay. Next, Skyline. Who here has heard of Skyline? Okay, so a few hands. Anyone actually using it? More interesting. Okay, so we got a couple of hands. For those of you who don't know what Skyline is, it is software that's being built by our GSS, our global support team. And it goes out and it does proactive support of your environment. So you install data collectors in your environment. It gathers information, sends it back to the VMware mothership, analyzes that for configuration settings and performance settings, and then they will get in touch with you when it sees that there's problems in the environment. So what we've done here is done an early access design for Skyline and how you would best implement it within a VVD environment. So, you know, how it would apply across geo regions, for example. You know, ensuring that the way that we do it, it's ready to analyze a full VVD environment. So at the moment, this stage is early access. We'll come out, validate it, and publish it soon as an add-on. So it is an optional component at this point. We also just published for VMworld some new security and compliance documents. Compliance is something that we've been talking about at least for the last one, maybe even actually two VMworlds. Something that we're super keen to really promote within the VVD. VVD is a very structured, prescriptive design that you can deploy. It makes a whole lot of sense for us to look at that and to effectively lock it down as much as possible, make it as secure as possible, and help you with some of the regulatory standards, those sort of compliance standards that many of you face. The way in which we're doing that is, first off, we've created a new introduction guide. So that's actually up there. And what that introduction guide does is it helps to explain what our approach is going to be towards all these different standards. I mean, in the green box there, you'll see built-in controls. So we're actually going through and we're looking at how we can harden the VVD for general compliance as much as possible. Are there changes that we can make that would be broadly applicable to all of them? It just makes sense for all of us to adopt. Then we look at enhanced guidance, how we can add additional guidance, maybe things that are a bit too onerous to ask everybody to do, and provide that. And then we map those to regulations. So how does that impact if you were interested in PCI, if you were interested in HIPAA, FedRAMP, CGIS, you know, the list goes on. And the other thing we come out with is a second document. The second one's actually early access. So we've taken NIST 853. Now, NIST 853 is the US sort of equivalent. There is an ISO standard that is used more broadly in Europe. But it's a government, federal, all-encompassing compliance standard. And the reason we took that is because most of the other compliance regulatory standards that companies have to adhere to in government agencies are really broadly overlap with this. We cover this, then we're actually covering 90% of many of the other regulatory standards. So it's just the quickest way to start. So we're going through that, and we've made a start just in this early access one. So it's not finished, it is early access. It shows the approach that we're taking, and we've pulled off some of the first few access controls. For example, account management, separation of duties, least privilege, and we've explained how to implement them in a VVD. Okay, next. This one is brand new. This got published 2 days ago, I think. And this is early access for multi-region. So as Nick described earlier, the VVD at the moment is set up for a geo region. You can use it in single region or you can use it in geo region, right? But we also, you know, we speak to many of our customers who have more than 2 regions. So what do they do? And this document really kind of starts to step through what are the different approaches to go beyond that. And it looks in different scenarios. For example, creating pairs. So you're taking that geo region model, but actually expanding it out into multiple DR pairs. Another really interesting one is actually expanding, like number 4 there, expanding past region B. And it's what that diagram is showing. We can actually take the dual region model and extend that out up to 8 regions, I think it is. And that is based on a limitation of link mode, I think it is, that creates that limitation. So we take the model, and because we've always kind of designed our models with scalability and expandability into consideration, it's actually fairly straightforward to take that and show how we would go to a third region, a fourth region, fifth region, and so on. So giving you those extra options. And then another one that was just published a couple of days ago. This one's super interesting. I should say, actually, this one and the previous one, we call these tech notes. These are sort of things that are not included within the VVD by default, but they are kind of additions, how you would extend the VVD. So it doesn't necessarily have to be part of the VVD, but it just shows you additional functionality. We have other tech notes that are available at the moment. For example, our networking, we advise customers to use BGP above the VVD. If you want to use OSPF, we actually have a tech note for that. It helps to explain how you would expand the VVD and use it in that kind of environment. So we have these additional tech notes that are already available. But this one, scaling up and scaling out, super interesting. I said earlier we test every single VVD release up to 10,000 VMs. Very rigorous, stressed testing. But we want to start looking at how you would use a VVD in an even larger environment. What are the sort of changes that you would need to make it fit that model? Because there's various components that we use within the VVD that actually you'll have seen the maximum configuration guides for many of the products. And those things in combination will often limit what you can actually do with it. So we've taken the VVD design and tried to figure out where those points are and how you would need to make changes. So for example, the standard SDDC, we can expand it up to 30,000 VMs, capable of running 30,000 VMs by actually making only fairly minor changes. For example, VRB has a limit of 30,000 VMs. By default, it's actually 20,000 VMs, but I think if you got to bump up the memory for the appliance, and you can get that up to 30,000 VMs, for example. This document includes a number of different options on how you would step that up depending on different scenarios. You can take the standard VVD and actually get up to 50,000 if you actually drop that VRB component, right? Which for many of our customers is not too much of a problem. And then we can even stretch it all the way up to 75,000 VMs if we're basically willing to split out the management, add additional management domains, because the limit over 50,000 is to do with vCenter in link mode can only go up to 50,000 VMs for the SSO domain. So if you're willing to actually split that out and create additional management domains for some of those extra workload domains that you need, then you can actually get VRA and VROps working at that kind of level. So it helps to explain how the VVD, even though we started it 4 years ago, effectively how well designed it is. It has that scalability, it has that option. And we have customers stressing the VVD up well over the 10,000 limit that we're rigorously testing. So it really helps prove that point. Okay, so that's all well and good. Some of you said that you've already downloaded some of the documents, but how do you actually get started with the VVD? I think I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but I wanted to kind of point it out. There's really 3 primary ways to get the VVD. One is go and grab the docs, docs.vmware.com. Get into it yourself and start doing that. Professional services will offer VVDs, but also we have a number of certified partners that you can actually line up to. I also wanted to call out VxRail. VxRail is a system by Dell EMC for converged hardware. There is guidance for how to deploy a VVD on top of VxRail that is now available. Based on 4.2, the 4.3 version is coming out very, very soon. So if VxRail is something that you're interested in to take care of your hardware and hardware lifecycle management, VVD can also be applied on top of that. So I'm going to put up here, I'm going to leave this up here while we open really up for questions. These are some of the other sessions that are going on this week around the VVD. There was some additional ones that were done at VMworld US. They're available online, you can grab them, but as Nick said, he's on one of these. But there's other ones where you can dive a bit more deeply into things. Before any of you rush off, I do want to point out there is a feedback questionnaire. Please fill that out. Fill it out for all the sessions, but please fill it out for our one. We're always interested in getting feedback, telling us how we can improve things and stuff. It really, really helps. But I want to kind of open up for questions. Does anyone have anything they want to ask or make comment about? Yeah.
Yeah, my question is regarding the VVD and especially the update part.
Okay.
Because as you have mentioned, there's an early access for the VVDS deployment.
Uh-huh.
I find myself how hard it is to do the update
Yeah.
if there's literally no resources available.
Mm-hmm.
And my question is, for example, do you plan to create a document or a post document that will cover the update from VVDS 1.1 to the newer version?
Okay.
For example, because there's a lot of changes on the ground.
Yeah.
And you have mentioned and stressed out a lot that you're not going to leave your customers.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's a good question. I'll just repeat it for the audio, asking about upgrade guidance for our early access documents, in particular PKS. So you're right, NSX-T, PKS, some of those sort of things, they're changing fairly rapidly, the products themselves. With the early access, we kind of make a statement that it's not validated. We don't test it as thoroughly. We don't provide, one of the things that we tend not to do with early access is provide deployment guidance. We just provide architecture and design. And the reason being is because we don't actually expect customers to deploy based on an early access. I mean, you can obviously go and, in your own environments, you can do what you need to do, but so generally we don't provide upgrade guidance from an early access onto an actual VVD. But once you're on a proper validated VVD, then yes, we try and guide that. Now, workload domain guidance, some of these additional guidance things aren't included. I mean, the upgrade guidance covers the core, the standard SDDC VVD. So that's the thing that we will always follow. But some of those components not necessarily. Now, I think probably the best thing for that is to pose that question within the community site where that document is posted, and one of our architects will actually take a look at it and help explain, because they know the process, they understand the process, it's just not documented.
Hey Forbes, I just wanted to add one more thing to that. So as Forbes said, that stuff's early access. So when we move, the way that we build early access is it's kind of a finger in the air. We're pretty sure that we've locked things down, but it's going to tweak a little bit before we actually bring it into the VVD proper. Right? So what we do is once we move it from early access out of that community site and we start to release those proper documentations, that's when we do all of that extra rigor. So that includes upgrade, that includes all of that extra scalability testing and that kind of stuff. So that's why you're not seeing all that additional effort going into that, because we don't want to do all of that work before we've actually locked the design down. Yeah, follow up.
It's a good question. I mean, at the moment we have a commitment that we will provide upgrade guidance for the standard, what is described within the standard VVD. There is additional guidance, things like workload domain guidance, for example. At the moment we don't have a commitment to provide update guidance around those. Often the workload domain guidance is based on really one product, sometimes two, but it's often one product. That then becomes a reasonably straightforward thing, because the product itself will give upgrade guidance. Not maybe specific to VVD, but it should step through that process. It shouldn't be any different when you're just upgrading one product. It shouldn't be substantially different within a VVD environment. I mean, it's the sort of thing that if we know there was differences, we could add it to release notes, for example, to try and highlight that. But we don't really want to focus on upgrade around those optional components, put it that way.
Cool. Yeah. And I have to quietly say I have some things here to give away to good questions that I'm not allowed to talk about.
I have a further question. According to the security, have you also, I would say, a guide how we can protect our, according to this design, workload from the security perspective? What's the best practice?
Yeah, so it's a good question, and it's something that, even from the outset, we take security into our thoughts, our design decisions. We want to improve upon that. I mean, we have the compliance side. We're specifically looking at regulatory standards, but security in general, we have an opportunity here to harden it for all users where it makes sense. So there is a process internally where we're actually stepping through parts of the VVD and figuring out how to make it more secure without excluding customers. Because we want the VVDs to be broadly applicable. We want them to be available for 90% of use cases. They should be there. So we have to balance that, be pragmatic about how much we lock it down. But yes, we're always kind of reviewing the VVD, trying to figure out how to make it more secure by default. And we've thought about, for example, like the service accounts that we use within the VVD, for example, how we can implement that. Yep.
And we follow the vSphere hardening guide and the general security best practices and try and make it as secure as possible out of the box so that there's less operational challenges of you implementing that after the fact. It's a lot easier to make something secure at the start rather than trying to bring security process and policy after people have started using an environment.
My last question, according to your partners, have you also a site that I can look which partner deploy the software-defined
So we're talking about CPA.
on these
Yeah.
best practices?
Yes, so kind of that third tenant, we have a partnership program called CPA, Certified Partner Architecture. There is a website, I'll look up the URL afterwards and I'll provide it to you, which actually lists out all the CPA partners that have gone through that process. So yeah, then you can safely go to those partners and you know that you're actually getting a VVD from them.
One quick question.
Yes.
It's been great for starting a greenfield environment, starting to develop. Is there a standard, or will there be any guidance in how to bring an existing environment
Brownfield?
that is complex?
Yeah.
You take that.
Yeah. So the question for the audio was VVD at the moment is very prescriptive for a greenfield, a brand new environment. But the question was when can we expect some guidance on brownfield, bringing an existing environment under VVD? So I wrote a migration guide. It's quite a high-level guide to try and help customers bring brownfield environments under a VVD-like management structure. There's, I think it was 3 or 4 different approaches at a high level. The struggle with brownfield is that VVD is a known state. We know what we're coming to, but we don't know what you're coming from. So it's very difficult to say, well, this is how you should do your brownfield to get here because yours is exactly the same as everybody else's in this room, right? That's a really hard challenge. So it's hard to go into that nitty-gritty step by step. I mean, the VVDs, the reason that they're really thick, almost like that, is because we go into really the click here, run this command, that is the number of IP addresses you need, this is the VLAN, like the real details. How you map your existing network infrastructure into a VVD, I can't really tell you how to do that. But I can at least give you some of the high-level thinking of these are the things you need to consider. Think about mapping your networks. Think about doing your workload sizings. Think about doing these kinds of things. So if you have a look, is it on the commute? No, it's on the. It's actually on doc. Yeah.
It's called the migration guide, which I find a bit confusing. Yeah, brownfield.
It should have brownfield in the name. But I think PM didn't like saying brownfield.
No, I like it.
But yeah, there is a doc there that gives that high level version.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay.
Running one more province around the center of physics.
Yeah.
So the complexity of updating and upgrading is tremendous.
Yep.
How do I make a use case into a business case?
Okay. Yeah. So you're asking about business cases to start deploying a VVD. So yeah, that's a really good question. There's a number of different approaches there, but it really comes down to what are you trying to achieve, like providing that operational simplicity, so that, for example, upgrades become a much easier, less risky prospect because you're following a procedure that has been well tested by the software vendor themselves. Also, think of the additional functionality, that you're gaining through that, because I appreciate what you're talking about is going from probably it's a vSphere environment with 1 or 2 products to something that's much larger. It's a question that we often get. We include NSX, and we include NSX, a core piece of the design, because of the functionality that it provides. It's not, our primary purpose is not to sell VMware additional pieces of VMware software. It's actually because we use NSX so extensively within the design to provide things like, DR, for example. That software enables that. We couldn't do what we do without it. We're providing guidance for dual site, so we need SRM, we need vSphere replication, etc. Explaining to management, here are the benefits. It's one, it's reducing the cost of the operational burden that we have at the moment. We're drowning under operational pressure. Here's a way of getting out of it, and here's the additional functionality that will be available to us with this new environment. I mean, there's lots of points to that. But
yeah, heaps of them.
Yeah.
I think de-risking the complexity is a huge one.
Yeah.
Especially, and the operational overheads, training costs, because we actually show you how to run the environment. So we give you, like for disaster recovery, do you know how to develop your own DR runbooks? We give them to you, right? So there's a huge cost benefit there alone. And it's not just in DR, then we talk about how do you monitor it, how do you manage it, how do you back it up? Like all these things are all built into the documentation. So while, yeah, there's a lot of complexity there that we try and demystify as well.
Okay.
Question at the back.
Question at the back.
And then this guy here.
Yeah.
You mentioned, some tech notes around things like pivotal and stuff like that, and you mentioned at the start that this is an SD, some SDDC, it's not for VDI, etc.
Okay.
Is there any plans to do a Horizon, or is there a conceptual reason why you wouldn't do that, or I just kind of get the feeling that this is a question you're answering?
I get asked this frequently. When I get asked, top 3 things that I get asked about, VDI is often one of them. Why don't we do a VVD instead of VVD for SDC, why don't we do a VVD for VDI? It's a really good question. I agree. We would love to do it. It's really a decision around limited resources and what we can apply to it. We don't want to do it until we're kind of ready to do it and we feel as though we can do it at an appropriate level. But it is definitely something that we have on our roadmap as a really key thing. We're already seeing an expansion out to something that's been called VVD for cloud providers, I think it is.
Yep.
It's basically vCloud Director kind of style version of what we provide as a VVD. We have been in talks with EUC that produce Horizon and VMware VDI for 18 months, 2 years about actually doing this. And each time we're talking, we're getting more and more momentum. So I genuinely think it's something that's going to come.
Resource allocation and priorities.
Yeah. It's definitely something that's going to come. Okay. Yeah.
My company is very interested in building a VVD environment to raise customer interest in all those VMware products beside vSphere. And my question is, we do have hardware, but the problem is licensing costs to build a demo environment with VRealize automation, VRealize suite, and so on. Do you have any advice? Do you have a demo? Or
The question was for the audio. Do we have any way to provide demo licensing for evaluation purposes? Yeah, the licensing aspect of the VVD is significant. Okay. We do need to cut off here.
Let's be the last question.
There's something that you can talk to your account team about getting some extended evaluation licenses. That's an approach that you could have. But yeah, that's something that is best worked with your local account team on that
that's the best
licensing thing.
You can get it up and running. VMware software generally comes with a 60-day evaluation license. That'll get you started. That gives you 2 months to talk to your account team and get a longer evaluation.
All right.
We'll stick around just outside. If you want to ask us any other questions, then please do. But please fill out the questionnaire. It really helps us get these sessions done. Thank you.
Guys.
Thank you.